It started the same way storms do. Quiet, calculated, pretending to be nothing until it tears everything open. I stepped out into the cold, morning air, coffee still steaming, when I saw it for the first time, parked right across my gate like it owned the ground beneath it. A massive white pickup, polished to blinding perfection, sun bouncing off its chrome grille. Across the side, bold white letters screamed, "HOA Police." My first thought wasn't anger, it was disbelief. Who in their right mind paints those words on their truck unless they've lost touch with reality? But the second I saw the man step out, my disbelief froze into something darker. He was tall, built like a soldier, tactical vest strapped tight, shades reflecting nothing but my own doorway. There was no badge number, no patch of authority, just a cheap laminate tag clipped to his chest that read, "Officer Mallory, Community Compliance Division." Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because if you've ever had someone try to rewrite the law on your front lawn, you'll understand exactly how fast calm turns to war. He stood there silent, arms crossed, like he was guarding the president. My driveway, my private property, was blocked end to end. I set my coffee down on the hood of my car, walked up to him, and kept my voice steady. "You're blocking my gate." He didn't even blink. "Routine inspection. Your property's under review," he said, voice clipped, robotic. I frowned. "Under review for what?" He pointed lazily toward the metal bars of my gate. "Improper alignment. Doesn't meet community aesthetics." For a second, I thought he was joking. Then he didn't smile. That's when I realized this wasn't an inspection. It was a performance, a power play dressed in polyester and delusion. "Move your truck," I said, stepping closer. "You're obstructing private access." His lips curled into a smirk. "You can't order a law enforcement vehicle to move." I let out a short laugh. "Law enforcement? You're a rent-a-cop with a paint job." His nostrils flared. He puffed his chest, and the sun hit the badge just enough for me to read the print. Cheap metal stamped with the words, "Community Compliance." That fake shine was enough to tell me everything. He leaned closer, voice lowering to a threat. "Watch your tone. Obstructing an HOA officer is a citation-worthy offense." I tilted my head, watching his reflection in my phone screen as I hit record. "Say that again, for the camera." The smirk vanished for half a second. "You'll regret that," he said, then turned on his heel, climbed back into the truck, and left the engine running for 6 hours straight. The rumble never stopped. By nightfall, the sound was still there, echoing through my house like a reminder. He wasn't going anywhere. That first night, I couldn't pull my truck in. My wife couldn't park. We sat at the window, watching headlights paint lines across the blinds. Every time I thought about walking out there, I pictured his smug grin waiting for a reaction. The next morning, the same truck was still there, engine idling, man inside, sunglasses on. When I walked up, he lowered the window just enough for his voice to leak out. "You're still in violation." He held up a crumpled piece of paper, HOA letterhead stamped across the top. "Perimeter spacing code. Until that's resolved, access is restricted." That's when the realization hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't about aesthetics or bylaws or paint colors. It was about control. I pulled out my phone again, hit record, and said evenly, "You're impersonating an officer." He said nothing, just smirked again and revved the engine. I walked back to my porch and dialed the sheriff's department. The deputy's voice on the other end was calm, but the moment I explained the situation, his tone changed. "Sir, HOA security has no authority to restrict property access. If he's claiming to enforce, that's impersonation. Document everything." I looked out at the truck and whispered, "Oh, I will." That day became documentation day 1. I measured the distance from his bumper to my gate, 3 feet, 8 inches. I took photos, video, timestamps. Every minute logged. I printed screenshots of HOA emails, each one carrying some vague inspection notice. Every paper trail they built, I mirrored. 3 days later, the truck was there again. This time he honked whenever I got close. Long, taunting bursts of sound that rattled the windows. I didn't shout, I didn't curse. I stood on my porch with my camera aimed straight at him, filming until the battery died. That's when the idea started forming. If he wanted to park in front of my gate, then fine. Let him park. I'd make sure that was the last thing he ever parked again. I didn't tell anyone at first. But when I drove past the HOA office that afternoon, the logo on their sign, Willow Ridge Community Management, hit differently. Those were the same people authorizing him. Behind every routine inspection was someone signing off on the harassment. I parked, grabbed my binder of evidence, and walked in. The air inside was cold, the kind of sterile that tries too hard to look professional. And there she was, HOA Karen, real name Karen Holloway, sitting behind a long conference table like it was a judge's bench. Early 50s, sharp suit, hair pulled so tight it looked painful. She smiled like a person who's been practicing superiority her whole life. "Mr. Cole," she said smoothly, her voice dripping fake warmth. "I assume this is about Officer Mallory?" The way she said officer made my teeth clench. "Not an officer," I corrected. "He's a private security guard with a truck that looks like a patrol car. He's been blocking my gate for 3 days. Her smile didn't move. "Trent Mallory was hired for community safety. If he parks there, it's in line with his duties." I stared at her. "Duties? He's obstructing my property? I've called the sheriff twice. They've confirmed he's got no authority." Karen folded her hands, tapping her manicured nails once. "Mr. Cole, we're all just trying to maintain order. Perhaps if you cooperated with inspections, tensions would ease." I laughed under my breath. "Inspections? You mean the fake citations citing bylaws you invented last month?" Her smile cracked just enough to show irritation. "You can raise those concerns at the next board meeting," she said curtly. "Until then, Officer Mallory stays where he is." That was it, the line in the sand. She wasn't just aware, she was complicit. The HOA wasn't clueless, it was coordinated. I walked out without another word, the sound of her heels clicking on tile echoing behind me like a countdown. By the time I got home, the plan was already forming in my head. Methodical, legal, precise. I called Leah Patel, my lawyer, and the only person I trusted to help me wage this war by the book. Leah had a voice like steel wrapped in silk. When I told her what was happening, she didn't sound surprised. "Ethan," she said, "obstruction of private property is still obstruction, no matter what they call it. Get your proof, get your witnesses, and I'll get your clearance." Next, I called Mike Taus. Big guy, logger, hands like bricks, and a quiet, moral code that didn't bend. He owed me a favor from last winter when I helped him fight a zoning fine. When I told him about the truck, he laughed once, short and humorless. "So he's parking across your gate every day?" "Every morning," I said, "and won't move until I play by their fake rules." Mike spat into the dirt on the other end of the line. "Then let's make sure he never parks there again. Clean, legal, permanent." Over the next 3 days, the binder grew thicker. Photos, timestamps, neighbor statements, even gas receipts proving the truck idled for hours. Leah drafted paperwork citing obstruction under county property law and impersonation under state statute. By the time she filed it, I felt the tide turning. The county clerk stamped it in red. Approved for enforcement. Legal clearance. A simple phrase that meant the next move was mine. The night before it all went down, I stood by the window watching the truck idle again, white paint gleaming under the porch light. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, measured. The kind of calm that only comes before something final. The binder sat on the kitchen table, the legal stamp still wet. I picked it up, set it on the dashboard of my truck, and whispered to myself, tomorrow, daylight. And that's where the story shifts, from silence to action, from humiliation to justice. Because when authority pretends to wear a badge, the law doesn't whisper back. It roars. It's funny how a person's past becomes a weapon when the present demands strategy. I'm not a hothead. I'm a man who learned to read systems the way others read maps. Years in logistics taught me to notice patterns, to spot when a small anomaly is the hinge holding an entire machine together. That training, the habit of keeping neat ledgers and timestamps, is what separated me from the neighbors who stood on porches shaking their heads. When the truck first rolled into place, I could have reacted with a fist or a scream. Instead, I started taking measurements. I treated the scene like a case file. Distance from bumper to gate, time of arrival, duration idling, license plate numbers, VIN, every detail that turns a grievance into evidence. That discipline is the backbone of how this whole thing unfolded. It's the reason I never felt like a victim. I felt like an investigator with a mission. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. If you've ever felt a veneer of authority threaten your front door, you know how quickly the small things add up into a siege. My background isn't glamorous, but it's relevant. I grew up in a family where orders mattered. My father retired from the county sheriff's office after 3 decades, and dinner table conversations treated statutes like scripture. I spent 10 years in transportation logistics, coordinating routes and permits, learning how government filings, registrations, and official seals worked like keys. Later, civilian life taught me to translate that cadence into paperwork, where a stamped signature can mean the difference between being ignored and being obeyed. When threats come dressed in uniforms, the first antidote is paperwork. The second is allies who know how to make the paperwork sing in court. Leah Patel is the kind of lawyer who makes judges listen. She's not theatrical. She's clinical, precise, and relentless. I didn't call her for bravado. I called her because she understands how to turn municipal technicalities into leverage. When I explained the situation, she didn't gasp or offer thin comforts. She asked for timeline, chain of custody for video, witness names, and the VIN. "Ethan," she said, "we don't win on shouting. We win on paper and process." Her office smelled like coffee and law books. When she spoke about discovery and affidavits, her voice had that same quiet authority I respected. She explained, in terms that cut through emotion, that HOA power is fundamentally administrative. Bylaws, covenants, rules adopted by boards, not badges that create police authority. Impersonation is criminal when someone asserts law enforcement power they don't possess. Misapplication of HOA funds for private enforcement crosses into fraud. Those were the legal pathways I hadn't wanted to consider, but Leah drew them out like a map and circled the exits. Mike Taus, the logger, is the kind of man you want beside you if things get physical. But he respects the law, too. He owes me for something small from last winter, the kind of favor that builds gratitude into obligation. When I told him about the truck, his response wasn't a cuss or a threat. It was a single, simple sentence. "We do it right." That's all I needed. Mike understands heavy machinery and the physics of presence, the way a logging truck sits and shifts and speaks with its weight. He also understands optics. He knew that if we moved in the dark, they'd call law and call us villains. So he agreed to daylight, cameras, and a legal paper trail. That alignment made everything legitimate before anyone else called it vigilantism. The first legal lesson Leah taught me was about chain of custody. Recording the truck wasn't enough. I had to show the court, unmistakably, that the footage was mine from the moment the pixels were captured. She walked me through preserving metadata, copying files to write-protected drives, and getting neighbor affidavits swearing to the authenticity of what they saw. Leah printed a template for sworn statements and explained how to notarize them so they'd be stout in court. She showed me exactly how to request certified copies of vehicle registration from the county motor vehicle office and how to submit a public records request for HOA meeting minutes and bank ledgers. I learned quickly that bureaucracy, when respected, becomes a weapon of accountability. We started pulling records. Vehicle registration is boring until it's not. Then it reads like a biography. Trent Mallory's truck was registered in his name, not to any HOA corporate account. That detail would matter later when the deputy read the title aloud, and the word personal punctured every claim of institutional authority. The HOA's financials were messier, but also more fruitful. Leah taught me to look for line items that didn't match operational logic, payments categorized as maintenance that were really checks to a private security contractor, or an invoice for uniforms coded as landscaping. Those subtle mislabels are what auditors live for. They tell a story when spreadsheets are honest and point to intent when they're not. Leah also explained the fine difference between civil and criminal remedies, and why we needed both. An injunction would stop the immediate harm. Get the truck out of my gate under penalty of law. That's civil, fast, and focused on disabling the action. Impersonation and misuse of funds, however, are criminal avenues that could carry fines and jail time if the prosecutor found probable cause. For the county to take criminal action, we needed a robust package: videos with preserved metadata, sworn affidavits from witnesses, certified copies of the HOA's bank records showing suspect disbursements, and a clear demonstration that Trent was asserting authority he didn't have. Leah promised to prepare both the civil writ and the criminal referral packet. The justice system moves at its own pace, but when you respect its rules, it moves. Neighbors became indispensable. People who had shrugged when the truck first arrived started to nod when I walked down the block with a camera and a clipboard. Fear is contagious, and so is courage. Once one neighbor signed an affidavit describing how the truck blocked her driveway when her daughter needed the car for work, others followed. I learned that community validation is as much a legal asset as an affidavit. It provides context a judge can see. Not every neighbor wanted to be involved, and I respected that. Some wanted distance, some wanted spectacle. The ones who leaned in provided statements, timestamps, and corroborating footage that layered the story so each angle matched. That mosaic is how you convert a solitary grievance into a public record. Leah walked me through the statutes she planned to cite. Obstruction of access in our county code is straightforward. Knowingly impeding another's lawful use of property is illegal. Impersonation statutes hinge on the representation of official capacity with intent to deceive. Using the styling of a patrol vehicle and authority-laden language was a clear risk factor. Fraud is about intent and benefit. If HOA funds were used to underwrite private enforcement, that could be reclassified as misappropriation. When she said those words aloud, impersonation, misappropriation, the legal frame made the small indignities monumental. This wasn't neighbor squabbling, it was a potentially criminal scheme. Leah's attention to technical detail extended to how we collected and stored evidence. She insisted on redundant backups, cloud storage with notarized timestamps, physical USBs stored in a locked safe, printed stills with annotated metadata. She taught me the value of a simple thing: witness proximity. Where a person stood when they recorded video affects admissibility. If a neighbor filmed from their porch and their affidavit stated the time and position, their testimony seals the footage's credibility. She advised that I preserve any written HOA correspondence exactly as I received it, because even a misdated letter can reveal intent. I learned to label every file like it was an exhibit. EXH1, EXH2, because in court, neatness is credibility. The county clerk's office was a dull, fluorescent world where the smallest seal changes everything. I walked in with Leah's letters and my binder and watched the clerk flip the stamp like it was a wand. When they stamped our motion for enforcement, the ink made the paper official in ways a camera never could. I felt the weight of that stamp the way a captain feels the buckle of command. It converted the private feeling of being harmed into public standing. We had legal clearance to seek immediate relief. That phrase, legal clearance, might sound bureaucratic, even bureaucrats' poetry, but it was the hinge point. With it, we could call deputies and expect action. Without it, we were just two men, with a plan and a truck. Every move was calculated to avoid escalation into unlawful conduct on my part. We set up presence, daylight, visible cameras, legal paperwork on the dashboard. Mike insisted on that more than I did. "If we have to act," he said, "we do it where the light is bright and the cameras are on." He spoke like a man who's learned the cost of shadows. There would be no back-alley justice, no secretive vengeance. We were staging a public exposure of a private abuse. That distinction mattered later when deputies arrived and the narrative shifted from revenge to enforcement. Emotion lived under the surface through all of it. Anger, sure, but more usefully, resolve. I found that process channels emotion into method. Where neighbors felt helpless, documentation is a kind of muscle. You build it until it flexes. Each sworn statement, each certified printout, each notarized affidavit was a rep toward reclaiming our street. Leah's language gave us legal oxygen. Mike's presence gave the plan physical backbone. Neighbors gave context and human testimony. Together, the evidence transformed individual frustration into civic cause. There was a moment, in the lull between filing and action, where community memory became obvious. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hale, stopped me on her porch and handed me a faded envelope. "You should know," she said, whispering like the town's secrets might overhear, "that Karen's been doing this for years. Quietly." The envelope contained a copy of some old meeting minutes showing a vote to approve security enhancements that had never been itemized again. That was the missing color to the ledger entries Leah had pointed out, the human trace behind the numbers. It confirmed that the pattern wasn't isolated. It was systemic. As the legal machinery engaged, I felt an odd calm. There's a profound difference between righteous fury and controlled action. The former consumes, the latter resolves. My father used to say that authority respects process. It doesn't respect noise. So we set our process like a trap. Transparent, lawful, and tight. Every day after filing, Leah checked in with updates. Mike tuned the logging truck, and neighbors added statements. The binder swelled. The evidence became undeniable. That swell is what turned private grievance into public accountability. It's the moment when a person's past, training in logistics, a father's lessons, alliances with the right kind of people, becomes active defense. I'm not proud of loving the procedural over the poetic, but I will admit it works. Systems are beats, and once you learn to conduct them, even the loudest, most delusional bluster can be scored and silenced. When the county stamped the removal order and Leah confirmed deputies would be notified during the action, the plan felt complete. It still terrified me to know what was coming, because people under pressure do unpredictable things. But fear is not a reason to stay passive. It's a reason to prepare. The preparation was now visible to everyone who cared to look. And that visibility changes the calculus of power in ways that swagger and fake badges never anticipate. We had documentation, witnesses, and a legal path. We also had an audience, neighbors who were no longer spectators but participants. That's when I realized the most powerful authority isn't a badge or a billboard. It's the combined, lawful will of a community that refuses to be bullied. The binder on my dashboard represented more than proof. It was a compacted manifesto, evidence, law, and collective refusal. With it, I felt not like a man about to exact vengeance, but like someone finally ready to enforce boundaries that had been eroded by pretenses of power. HOA power is a quiet thing until it isn't. It operates like a slow-acting solvent that dissolves rights one polite letter at a time. In Willow Ridge, that solvent had a name and a face. HOA Karen, Karen Holloway, 52. Hair always taut in a style that suggested a permanent tension with softness, the sort of woman who wore cruelty like a tailored blazer. She moved through committee rooms with the steady arrogance of someone who'd learned authority is less about law and more about optics. Her voice was smooth. Her decisions felt inevitable because she curated the environment where inevitability could thrive. The board met when she said the time was right. Contracts arrived already signed by hands she trusted. Complaints were filtered through an email address she personally controlled. It wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. If you think power only matters when it wears a badge, watch how it behaves when it wears a smile. Karen's method was surgical. Manufacture a rule, find a pretext, and then enforce selectively. At board meetings, she spoke in calm cadences about community standards and property values, and the room, hungry for order, nodded. Outside the chamber, enforcement took the form of letters, formal, typeset, threatening fines in figures meant to intimidate rather than resolve. These citations had a rhythm. First a mailed notice, then a follow-up, then a curbside visit that always conveniently coincided with the homeowner refusing to cooperate. For those targeted, the escalation felt personal, but to Karen, it was policy, a way to move dissenters into compliance by attrition. She cultivated fear as stewardship. She signed letters with a pen that left no fingerprints on the conscience. The board itself read like a collection of complicit actors who benefited from the arrangement. Meetings were framed as democratic, but key votes were rubber-stamped. Vendor contracts, landscaping, security, event staffing were steered to the same few companies where friendly hands happened to serve on the payroll. If you traced the money, the trail bent inevitably towards a handful of names. That bending is what auditors call related party transactions. To the rest of us, it looks like favoritism, and to Karen, it functioned as currency. She built a network where obligations flowed outward to allies and returns flowed back into influence. When someone questioned it, the conversation shifted from numbers to propriety. "We're maintaining the neighborhood," she'd say. And very few wanted to push past the performative rationale into the ledger's dark corners. Victims of that machinery spoke in hushed specifics. The couple across the street received 47 pages of notices about aesthetic violations within a month. Letters accusing them of improper hedge height after they refused to support a special assessment. A veteran with a legitimate driveway ramp was fined for permanent structure even after producing medical documentation. The fine amount was calibrated not to correct behavior, but to punish persistence. The pattern was unmistakable. Enforcement targeted those who resisted the board's informal rules, and those rules conveniently lined up with Karen's private preferences or the interests of vendors who, suspiciously, provided services at discounted rates to board members. It read like a script. Problem identified, vendor engaged, invoice issued, payment authorized, and dissent neutralized. Legally, the HOA operated within a gray envelope. Covenants and restrictions are powerful tools, but they have limits. Covenants can control paint colors and fence heights, but they cannot authorize someone to impersonate an officer or to physically block access to property. Karen knew the boundary, though she traded around it with elegant ambiguity. The board's minutes would reference security initiatives and increased patrols, leaving the language vague enough to claim plausible deniability while precise enough to justify private enforcement. That vagueness was intentional. It provided her cover. No single line in the minutes ever read, "Use HOA funds to buy patrol vehicles." But a curious auditor would find entries labeled safety equipment, community presence, or outsourced compliance. When you see the invoice line that reads security enforcement, $200, you don't have a crime by itself. You have a puzzle piece. Put enough puzzle pieces together, and you see a picture of intent. I learned the mechanics of that picture by reading minutes and matching them to bank statements. That's how a narrative turns into evidence. One invoice to a local contractor billed the HOA for uniform procurement under landscaping, while an adjacent line described payment for community outreach that, when you followed the purchase orders, actually flowed to a man who now drove a truck painted like a patrol car. Those mismatched categories are not mistakes. They're a bookkeeping strategy to conceal the real purpose of expenses. No, auditor knows to look for suspiciously consistent payments to the same contractor outside the scope of their contract, combined with a lack of competitive bidding. When you see a series of payments that lack supporting procurement documentation, red flags go up. When those payments coincidentally line up with increased enforcement actions against dissident homeowners, the red flags become a fabric. Political ties made the fabric stronger. Karen put her chips into local influence, donations to small but consequential county campaigns, friendly lunches with municipal staff, a pattern of hospitality that created reciprocation. I discovered invoices for community events that matched dates when a favored contractor received a no-bid contract renewal. It's not evidence of bribery by itself, but it's the connective tissue that transforms administrative oddities into a pattern of influence. Public officials are human. Favors compound. That's why transparency matters. When financial flows are deliberate and opaque, power centralizes. Power is a fungible commodity in neighborhoods, just as in higher halls. You trade favors for silence and contracts for loyalty. The ledger also showed the human cost. A neighbor named Ramirez spent $2,400 contesting fines before he finally moved, unable to justify the legal expense and unwilling to live under daily harassment. Another family received repeated letters about unauthorized structures and once spent a summer of weekends defending themselves against a barrage of citations that eventually left them emotionally exhausted and bankrupted. These are the collateral casualties of a system that weaponizes adjacency. When authority masquerades as stewardship, it produces casualties who pay in cash, time, and dignity. To dismantle that, you need to map both the legal framework and the human network. Leah taught me how to read the ledger not as a list of transactions, but as a set of relationships. Which contractors received recurring payments? Which board members signed off? Which checks were voided and reissued? These questions reveal signatures, literal and figurative, that prove coordination. There's a phrase auditors use: sustained irregularity. It means a pattern that's not random, that points to deliberate misclassification of funds. That's what we were hunting, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to follow the money like a trail through underbrush until it opens on a clearing with a name on a chair. Karen Holloway. It's one thing to label someone corrupt in conversation and another to summon a legal threshold that triggers enforcement. That threshold requires corroboration. Minutes that align with payments, witness statements about directives given, contracts that lack competitive bids, and invoices coded in ways that mask purpose. We needed the vendor agreements, the bank reconciliations, the sign-in sheets for security services, and email trails that showed who approved what. Subpoenas are blunt instruments for getting that material. Audits are surgical. Leah advised we prepare both. Subpoena power would force records into daylight. An independent audit would interpret the numbers with forensic rigor. That's when the narrative turned from neighbor complaint to potential criminal referral. Misappropriation of HOA funds becomes fraud when expenditures misrepresent purpose, especially if they benefit private individuals or insiders. Impersonation becomes criminal when someone presents themselves as empowered by law and compels behavior through that false pretense. When those two threads are woven together, private enforcement paid for with association funds and executed by a man who styled himself as an officer, the legal picture becomes stark. We didn't need conjecture. We needed a paper trail and witnesses. And the paper trail gave us something worse for Karen than any smear. It showed pattern, intent, and, crucially, plausible motive. Her motive wasn't mystery or ideology, it was consolidation of control. When you see that a board chair's influence correlates with vendor relationships and repeated enforcement against dissenters, you see a system optimized to silence opposition. That's not governance. It's racketeering on a neighborhood scale, dressed up in neat fonts and polite memos. The emotional weight of that discovery was heavier than I expected. Suddenly, the indignities, fines, letters, blocked gates, were not isolated slights, but instruments of a deliberate strategy. Knowing that removes the comfort of randomness and replaces it with accountability. It also makes the response less personal and more structural. We were no longer responding to a single man in a truck. We were challenging an architecture that produced him. As we prepared subpoenas and lined up auditors, I kept thinking about the small acts of cruelty that had seemed inconsequential. A letter framed in a polite tone. A smile that precedes a sanction. Karen's arrogance made those acts surgical and effective. She presided over an engine of control whose gears were money, code, and social pressure. But arrogance also leaves signatures. Patterns repeated because the arrogant individual believes themselves above detection. That belief is arrogance's undoing. The next move would be to make those signatures visible in a way the public could not ignore. We would not merely argue about bylaws in a closed meeting. We would expose ledger lines, produce vendor contracts, and narrate the human cost aloud. The plan was not about spectacle for its own sake. It was about converting private manipulation into public record. And if the ledger told a story, we intended to have it read aloud in a courtroom, in a press release, and in neighbors' memory. At the end of that section of discovery, there was a single line item that functioned like a detonator. Security enforcement, $200, signed by Karen Holloway, and dated the HOA week before Trent began his round-the-clock presence. On its face, a number and a note. In context, a green light. That line item was the hinge we needed, the small, negligent detail that would let the rest of the structure fall. When I held that page in my hand, the whole scheme no longer felt hypothetical. It felt imminent. What they didn't know was that once you see the pattern in numbers, you start seeing it everywhere. The next act would be to translate that accounting evidence into legal action and public accountability. The ledger had spoken. The question now was whether the law could make the ledger matter. Discovery is the moment where suspicion hardens into fact. It's not dramatic, not cinematic, at least not at first. It's hours of reading, comparing, cross-referencing, chasing one line in a document until it either dead ends or turns into a wire that lead straight into someone's pocket. But if patience is a weapon, then I was armed. I sat at my kitchen table with a laptop. Leah's instructions spread like an operations manual, and the HOA's records laid out in front of me like a crime scene. Every entry was a clue. Every date, a footprint. Somewhere in those columns was the reason a man felt empowered to wear a badge he didn't earn and block a citizen from his own gate. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Because if you've ever had to fight an enemy who hides behind paperwork, you'll understand why discovery feels more like trench warfare than justice. Leah had me start with the bylaws. HOAs are built on them. Their constitution, their loopholes, their shield. Willow Ridge's bylaws were old, amended dozens of times, each amendment signed by Karen Holloway herself. Most of it was routine. Landscaping standards, noise limits, parking regulations. But buried between sections of community decorum was a clause that looked like it didn't belong. Section 14, Community Safety and Enforcement Authority. It stated that the board could designate community safety agents to monitor compliance with HOA policies. Simple words, but deadly vague. No language about oversight, no limitations, no mention of actual law enforcement boundaries. It was a paragraph of permission. Permission that Karen had twisted into a badge. Leah's first question when she saw it was, who approved this amendment? The signature line said, Board Majority, but the date stamp didn't match any of the recorded board meeting minutes. The amendment was added months after the supposed vote took place. That's fraud by insertion, a silent rewrite of policy after the fact. It was the backbone of their defense, and now it was brittle. I took screenshots, printed copies, labeled everything. Leah smiled thinly when she saw them. This is where the thread unravels, she said. The next step was following the money. Karen's security enforcement budget sat under community management, operations, a deliberately generic label. Leah taught me how to match bank transfers to invoices. Each month showed payments to a company called Safe Haven Services, LLC. No website. No corporate filings in the state business registry. When we traced the tax ID, it linked back to an address belonging to Karen's cousin, a man with a background in private contracting and a history of bankruptcy. On paper, it was a vendor. In reality, it was a laundering funnel for HOA funds that paid for the truck, the uniforms, and likely Trent's salary. Leah's voice was calm as we built the evidence log. We need dates, amounts, and purpose. Fraud isn't about morality, it's about math. So I made a spreadsheet that would make an auditor weep. Line by line, I listed payments, cross-referenced HOA meeting dates, added screenshots of emails, and highlighted every inconsistency. The total sum funneled to Safe Haven over 2 years exceeded $68,000. Every cent came from homeowner dues, and in those same 2 years, the HOA sent more violation notices than in its previous decade combined. It wasn't about safety, it was about leverage. We met at Leah's office late into the night, the fluorescent lights painting everything sterile and real. We'll build this like a criminal referral, she said. You're not accusing, they're confessing through their paperwork. She drafted an affidavit for me to sign, verifying the accuracy of every record. The language was clinical. I, Ethan Cole, do affirm that the following documents were collected from the Willow Ridge HOA via publicly accessible channels and are true and unaltered to the best of my knowledge. That's the kind of sentence that turns a grievance into sworn testimony. At her direction, I filed a formal records request with the county to obtain the HOA's corporate filings. Within days, we had digital copies of every board submission. That's where we found the first smoking gun, an equipment requisition form for HOA patrol vehicle customization, approved by Karen Holloway and billed to community funds. The description listed emergency lighting package, decals, dash-mounted recording system. It was an HOA-funded police impersonation kit. The invoice amount matched one of the $100 to $200 payments to Safe Haven Services. The truck parked in front of my gate had been built with my money. The evidence began to grow teeth. Leah compiled a binder that felt like a weapon, each page a small, undeniable act of exposure. She highlighted specific codes: impersonation of a public officer, misuse of non-profit assets, obstruction of property access. She quoted the statutes verbatim, the way prosecutors like to hear them. We weren't waving our fists anymore. We were drafting a case file. Still, legal weight only matters when law enforcement believes you have enough to swing it. Leah made the call herself to the sheriff's office, requesting a consultation with the fraud division. When the HOA deputy arrived, I recognized his type: ex-military bearing, quiet, eyes that measured rather than judged. We laid out the binder on Leah's desk, walked him through each transaction, each image of the truck, each clause of the falsified amendment. He didn't interrupt once. At the end, he closed the binder and said, "You've done half our job already." That's how justice begins. Not with anger, but with paperwork too detailed to ignore. Over the next few days, the county confirmed what we already knew. The HOA had no legal authority to authorize patrol vehicles, and any attempt to enforce property restrictions through impersonation fell under criminal statute. The investigation request was opened under case number 42227A. Leah's assistant handed me the official intake receipt. I read it twice before realizing my hands were shaking. The system that once felt indifferent was finally breathing in our direction. But bureaucracy doesn't move fast. It moves deliberately. And while the wheels turned, Trent's truck stayed parked, engine humming like mockery. That's when the plan to act publicly crystallized. We weren't going to ambush him. We were going to document enforcement, the real kind. We coordinated with the deputies. They would be stationed 2 blocks away on standby the morning of the execution of the removal order. The paperwork gave us the right to clear obstructions using licensed contractors. Mike's logging truck was licensed. His presence, his machinery, his caution, all perfectly within the law. The night before, Leah called me with final instructions. "Tomorrow isn't about revenge," she said quietly. "It's about precedent. When the camera rolls, you're not just showing him what he can't do, you're showing everyone what the law can do when it's documented correctly." I promised her it would stay clean. No shouting, no provocation, just the sound of legality colliding with arrogance. By dawn, everything was staged. The county seal was stamped across the order in blue ink. Enforcement authorized. The neighbors had been notified. Cameras were ready. Mike sat in the cab of his truck, hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward. The air smelled like diesel and rain. The white pickup appeared on cue, rumbling up the road like clockwork. Trent climbed out, vest tight, sunglasses hiding whatever fear might flicker beneath. He leaned against his hood and muttered something about community orders. I walked toward him, the paper between my fingers. "Not today, Trent," I said. "This is over." He glanced at the document, scoffed, and said, "You think that changes jurisdiction?" I almost smiled. There is no HOA jurisdiction on private property. The deputies 2 blocks away had their radios open, listening. The tension wasn't cinematic. It was clinical, a quiet collision of fact and fantasy. Trent didn't move, so I raised my hand. Mike revved the logging truck, the sound rolling, like thunder down the street. Every neighbor heard it, every phone camera caught it. It wasn't vengeance. It was visual evidence that paper beats arrogance. When the heavy bumper touched the front of Trent's truck, when metal folded under metal, the sound wasn't destruction. It was closure. The law, captured on film, doing what it's supposed to do. The sheriff's deputies arrived seconds later, lights flashing. They'd been briefed, ready. The arrest was clean, procedural. Karen arrived mid-scene, shouting about policy and board rights, but her words fell apart when the deputy unfolded the same binder Leah had assembled and read aloud the line items that bore her name. Her face, once polished and imperious, cracked in real time. Every neighbor saw it. By the end of the day, the fraud report was public record, the truck impounded, and the county announced a review of Willow Ridge's HOA charter. The paperwork that began as quiet rebellion had turned into civic momentum. Discovery didn't just uncover corruption, it revealed the anatomy of arrogance. A signature here, an invoice there, and suddenly the entire facade crumbled. That's what makes this stage the heartbeat of any fight for justice. Not the noise, not the showdown, the documentation, the quiet persistence that transforms private suffering into public accountability. Confrontation isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's the deliberate inhale before the strike. By the time we reached that morning, tension had stretched so tight that every sound carried a hum of electricity. The neighborhood had grown used to the daily spectacle of Trent's truck idling across my gate, but familiarity had turned to contempt. People whispered now. Kids pointed. Neighbors angled their phones discreetly from windows, filming every minute of his self-imposed vigil. The facade of authority he had built through arrogance was starting to rot under daylight, and you could smell it. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Tell me if you've ever seen someone so certain of their own power that they forgot it could vanish in a single document. The harassment peaked in a rhythm that made mockery feel methodical. Every morning at 7:15, the same truck. Every evening at dusk, the same rev of defiance. It wasn't about enforcement anymore. It was theater. Trent was performing dominance for an audience of one, convinced that repetition made his delusion legitimate. The engine noise became a pulse through the asphalt, an audible heartbeat of a lie sustained by Karen Holloway's signature. Neighbors complained, filed their own grievances, and received template replies signed by Karen herself, filled with corporate politeness and contempt disguised as concern. She'd written sentences that could choke you with civility. "We thank you for your patience while we ensure the safety and harmony of our community." The community she referred to was her court, and she its only monarch. One morning, the play shifted. He wasn't idling anymore. He was actively blocking, turning his truck sideways, lights flashing even though there was no emergency. The gesture was too overt to ignore. That's when the first local blogger showed up, someone who ran a small neighborhood page. They posted photos of the truck, of Trent's uniform, of the fake insignia that gleamed too bright in the morning sun. Within hours, the images were online, hashtags spreading like wildfire. Pintro Hoakopgate, Badge of Ego, Willow Ridge War. People love justice stories, especially when the villain has a name. And now he did. So did she. By afternoon, the story had jumped from local forums to the county news cycle. Reporters started calling Leah's office, asking for statements. She didn't indulge them. "We're not performing this," she told me. "We're proving it." But even she understood that public pressure has a gravity that bureaucracies can't ignore. When the sheriff's department receives 20 calls about a single truck blocking a private gate, it doesn't matter how small the issue looks on paper. It becomes a matter of optics. Optics make officials move faster. Karen, however, doubled down. She sent a letter to all homeowners declaring that false narratives circulating online were damaging the HOA's reputation. She warned against unauthorized recordings and claimed that certain individuals were undermining community safety. The language was defensive, sharp, and unintentionally admissible. Because when you issue a written denial about a false claim of enforcement, you're affirming that enforcement exists. She had written her own confession between the lines. Leah printed the letter and added it to the binder with a tab labeled simply, Intent. Trent's behavior deteriorated with his authority. The more attention he got, the less composed he became. He'd glare at neighbors who filmed him, sometimes step out of his truck and demand they delete videos. One neighbor caught him on tape muttering threats, promising citations that didn't exist. The footage leaked onto social media, and suddenly the comment sections were filled with anger and disbelief. Is this even legal? Why does an HOA have a cop? Where's the sheriff? What began as a small local conflict had turned into a county-wide discussion about private power gone rogue. Every share, every comment pulled another thread out of the facade Karen had built. Leah used that noise strategically. Public outcry became a safety net. Publicity, she said, is accountability's shadow. She made sure the sheriff's office knew that media outlets were circling the story, not as a threat, but as an incentive for action. The deputy assigned to our case called her the next morning. "We'll be in position when you enforce the order," he said. "We want this clean." For the first time, the law wasn't something distant and abstract. It was presence, quiet, waiting. The morning of confrontation unfolded like choreography. Every step planned, every outcome mapped. Mike parked his logging truck 2 houses down, engine rumbling low, the kind of growl that speaks in warnings. I stood by my gate, county order in hand, Leah's voice echoing in my head reminding me, "Stay calm, say little, let the document speak." Trent arrived on cue, punctual as arrogance, his truck gleaming, decals catching morning light. He stepped out, glanced at me with that familiar half-grin of entitlement. "Morning, Cole. HOA orders still stand." His confidence wasn't just misplaced. It was fossilized. I held up the county order, the seal glinting gold in the sun. "This is from the county, Trent. You're done." He took a step closer, looking over the paper like it was a trick. "Doesn't override association policy," he said. His tone was mocking, but his stance wasn't as sure. "Policy isn't law," I answered, "and you're not law enforcement." The words hit him like slow poison. He stared, jaw tight, as I spoke the final line Leah had drilled into me. "You're trespassing, and this document authorizes removal." He laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. "You gonna make me move?" he asked. I didn't respond. I raised my hand, the same motion we'd practiced, the signal that would start it. Mike revved his engine, louder this time. The street vibrated. Neighbors emerged onto porches, cameras rolling. The first whine of gears drowned out Trent's next words. For the first time, he stepped back. When the logging truck inched forward, it wasn't rage, it was inevitability. The steel frame kissed the HOA vehicle's fender, a scrape, a dent, then the slow, merciless collapse of metal under weight. The sound was primal and final. Trent shouted, backing away, hands raised. The truck that had symbolized his authority folded like tinfoil, and in that sound, the balance of power inverted. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it crunched. Blue and red lights flared at the end of the street. Deputies arrived as if on cue, vehicles gliding into position, uniforms stepping out with calm precision. They already knew the facts. Leah had briefed them. The first deputy approached Trent, asked for identification, then read him the statute he'd violated: obstruction of access, impersonation, misuse of HOA funds. His face, the same one that had hidden behind dark lenses for weeks, looked small now in sunlight. He tried to speak, but the deputy's voice overrode him. "Sir, this vehicle is registered to you personally. You've been illegally blocking access to private property for over 2 weeks." The handcuffs clicked like punctuation marks. Karen's car screeched onto the scene moments later. Her heels struck pavement like accusations. "You can't arrest him," she barked. "He was enforcing community safety." So my deputy didn't even look up. "Ma'am, we have financial records linking HOA funds to unauthorized enforcement activity. You're being served notice of investigation for fraud and impersonation." Her words stumbled into fragments. You can't, this is..." But her control was gone. When Leah arrived, calm and deliberate, she handed over the binder. "This has every document, every transaction, every false citation." The deputy flipped it open, nodded once, and radioed for a fraud investigator. The crowd watched silently. Phones captured everything. The arrest, the confrontation, the moment Karen's face fell when she realized the crowd wasn't on her side. For years, she'd weaponized image. Now, image was her undoing. She tried to plead her case, but no one listened. Authority only works when people believe in it. That belief was gone. As Trent was led away and Karen stood speechless, the neighborhood exhaled. People cheered softly, not out of malice, but relief. They weren't witnessing vengeance. They were witnessing balance restored. The HOA truck was hauled off, crushed and broken. The deputies' lights faded down the street, leaving behind a silence that felt holy. That was the day the myth of their power ended. That was the day order became something measurable, not decreed. Leah said later that cases like this rewrite local precedent, that somewhere a prosecutor was already outlining charges. But to me, it was simpler. The gate was clear. The air was quiet. The sound of an engine idling no longer haunted my mornings. The law had finally spoken, and it hadn't whispered. It had thundered. When systems collapse, they rarely do so with noise. They implode quietly, leaving behind the kind of silence that feels earned. The days after the verdict were unnaturally peaceful. The morning air that once carried the rumble of Trent's truck now carried birdsong. The gate that had been a blockade stood open, gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time in months, there was nothing between me and the road, but air. It's strange how victory feels less like a shout and more like a deep exhale. You wait so long for it to happen that when it does, you almost don't believe it's real. But it was. The HOA was gone. The tyrants had fallen, and Willow Ridge finally belonged to its people again. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Tell me, if you saw justice unfold in front of your own home, would you film it, or would you just stand there and let the quiet prove everything? The week after Karen's sentencing, the county issued the formal dissolution order. It arrived printed on heavy parchment, embossed with the seal of the court, and signed by the presiding judge. The wording was clinical, but devastating. The Willow Ridge Homeowners Association is hereby terminated as a governing body and shall cease all administrative function effective immediately. The HOA that once dictated hedge, heights, mailbox colors, and human dignity no longer legally existed. What took years to build was undone by truth told on paper. That was Leah's phrase, and it stuck with me. Truth told on paper doesn't vanish, it multiplies. When the county trucks came to remove the old HOA sign, neighbors gathered silently. Some filmed, others just watched. The workers loosened bolts, the metal letters creaking as they came free. The sound was like the last breath of arrogance leaving a room. Mike stood beside me, arms crossed, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. "Guess the road's open again?" he said. I nodded. Yeah, open and quiet. It was all we needed to say. We'd fought the battle with logic and law instead of fists, and the proof of our endurance stood in front of us. Open gates, free streets, neighbors unafraid to smile again. Karen Holloway's downfall became more than local news. It became a cautionary tale. State publications picked it up. Editorials framed it as a landmark victory for homeowner rights. The legal world called it precedent. The rest of us called it peace. Her fines totaled over $85,000, payable directly to the county and the homeowner's restitution fund. Her license to manage associations was permanently revoked. In her sentencing hearing, she tried to speak, to explain herself. But the judge interrupted her with a single sentence that still echoes in my head. Authority is a privilege, not a throne. It was the most perfect summation of everything that had gone wrong in Willow Ridge. Trent served his time without incident. Reports said he was quiet, compliant, and mostly kept to himself. I didn't take satisfaction in his imprisonment, only in the knowledge that his silence meant acknowledgement. He'd been used by Karen's greed, and in the end, both of them paid. The truck he'd once polished like a crown was sold at auction for parts. The proceeds went to the HOA restitution fund. I didn't buy any of it back. I didn't want trophies. The true reward was invisible. Peace restored, dignity intact, and the knowledge that truth, once weaponized correctly, doesn't need applause. The county appointed a transitional board to manage community logistics, garbage collection, road maintenance, public utilities, until residents could vote for new leadership. This time, no hidden amendments, no backroom deals, no unchecked signatures. Leah helped draft the new bylaws herself. Short, transparent, written in plain language, capped with a clause requiring annual audits and open access to financial records. Every meeting would be public, every decision recorded, every official removable by majority vote. It was governance reborn under daylight. As weeks passed, neighbors who once avoided eye contact began waving again. Kids rode bikes past my driveway without fear of reprimand for tire marks. The laughter that drifted through the cul-de-sac was the sound of community, resurrected. It's easy to underestimate how much fear silences joy until the fear is gone. The absence of that truck, the endless idling, the staged authority, left behind a peace that felt almost sacred. I'd sit on my porch some evenings and just listen to the stillness. Leah called it quiet justice. She was right. When the county clerk mailed me the final documentation, case closed, restitution dispersed, fines settled, I kept one copy and gave the other to Leah. She framed hers in her office beneath a quote from Atticus Finch that read, "The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience." Mine stayed on my shelf beside the binder that had started it all. The binder had worn edges, smudged fingerprints, and a faint coffee stain across Exhibit 12. Every imperfection felt earned. It was the story of how ordinary people dismantled corruption using only persistence and truth. On the one-year anniversary of the HOA's dissolution, the residents of Willow Ridge held a small gathering. Not a celebration, more a remembrance. We met by the community fountain, now cleaned and restored, the one Karen had once reserved for board members only. We shared stories about the ordeal, laughed at the absurdity of the fake badge, and spoke openly about what it had taught us. No one wanted another HOA. What we wanted was accountability, transparency, and respect. Those three words were painted onto a new wooden sign at the entrance. Welcome to Willow Ridge, a free community. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. That night, when everyone left, I walked alone down the street toward my gate. The same gate that once symbolized confinement now looked like a monument. The hinges creaked softly when I opened it, and I smiled. It wasn't just a gate anymore. It was proof that standing your ground doesn't always mean standing still. Sometimes it means learning the law so well that even corruption can't outmaneuver you. Leah visited one last time before moving on to another case. She stood by the gate, hands in her pockets, surveying the street with a small nod. "You realize what you did here, right?" she asked. "You turned a story of harassment into a legal blueprint. You didn't just win. You documented how to win." I didn't answer right away. I looked down the road, now bathed in the golden haze of sunset, and finally said, "I just wanted peace." She smiled. "That's exactly why you got it." Now, whenever I see that old patch of road, I think about how thin the line between order and tyranny really is. It's not laws that protect people, it's those willing to enforce them correctly. Karen believed control came from intimidation. I learned that real control comes from discipline, from calm, from preparation. The greatest power any citizen can hold is proof, and the courage to present it. As the sun dropped below the trees that evening, Mike drove by, honked once, and waved. His logging truck, the same one that once brought an end to arrogance, rumbled past peacefully, hauling nothing but timber. The irony wasn't lost on me. The machine that had symbolized confrontation now symbolized continuation. The road was clear, the community free, the story finished. But the principle endured. Justice doesn't retire. It waits quietly for its next assignment. So when people ask me if crushing that truck felt good, I tell them the truth. The crush wasn't revenge, it was punctuation. The story didn't end with the sound of metal. It ended here, with open gates, a quiet street, and the echo of lessons learned. Because in Willow Ridge, justice didn't come from titles or power or paperwork. It came from standing your ground, one document, one truth, one act of courage at a time.